NFL DFS strategy show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, Osmo.com. It's the Week 11 final thoughts show for this main slate. Chris Randone, Sal Vitri. Sal, happy Saturday, baby. What's going on?
Happy Saturday, man. Yeah. Just enjoying the week so far and prepping for tomorrow's slate. NBA every day, just trying to grind through that. So it's been a good weekend. How about you, man?
It's going good, man. I'm excited to talk this slate, really just break down the last minute information that we have. And, it's going to be, I feel like it's going to be a good week. Everyone's on Brian Hill. We were talking about it before the show that we might be opposed to that. And I can't wait to kind of hear your breakdown. So before we do, though, just to remind everyone, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, guys, if you haven't signed up yet, you can use the word or the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, and you get $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. And that gets you 3 entries into the NFL Baller Tournament, which is a pretty actually good tournament. For those of you who maybe play on DraftKings or FanDuel, a lot of the times, a lot of sharks there. It's where all the top players play. But when you go to these other websites like Yahoo, there's not so many of those players. So it also helps the playing field. Get yourself more of an equal playing field. And so if you haven't signed up there yet, don't forget they have that promo code. They have that offer available. AWESEMO is the code once again. All right, guys, week 11. It's why we're here. We're going to go ahead and do things how we do it. We're going to look at ownership first, buy, sell, with the field, see what Sal's thinking, see what he wants to do this week. And so right now we're going to go ahead and pull up the ownership. It's updated. And we're going to start with DraftKings, Sal. And the top guy is the guy that I can't wait for you to break down, but Brian Hill, 4,800 at Carolina, 33.6% right now. Go ahead and break this down.
Yeah, so I think the pricing on Hill is a huge reason why he's owned this week. There's not a lot down there. Jordan Howard seems to be questionable, maybe even doubtful. We kind of lost J.D. McKissick with Ty Johnson being a full participant yesterday. So, like the value running backs, there's not a lot. So I understand why people are flocking to Hill. And in cash, I think it's fine. There's no Freeman. There's no Austin Hooper. So it's an okay spot. But when you're talking about in tournaments, anytime a player is 33 or the highest owned player on the slate, it's worth looking into closer. And when I look at Brian Hill, I see a guy that has a lot of holes in him and a guy that, honestly, even at half this ownership, I would maybe match or be under the field at. So this ownership is high, and let's really like unpack a lot of what's here. So you get Brian Hill, a guy in his career who it's really hard to say just based on separate situations, but 151 offensive snaps, 60 routes run, 66 receptions. So about a reception every 10 routes run. So you get that. Freeman was running around 23 routes per week, about 12 and a half carries per week if you factor out his injury week. So even if you give him the exact same role as Devonta Freeman as the number one, and you factor in that some of these backup running backs take on the Ito Smith role during those weeks when he was healthy, I think you get Brian Hill somewhere around 15, 16 touches in this game, which is good for a cash play at that price point in this matchup. But when it's 35% owned and majority of his work comes on the ground and he's a 6-point underdog with, I don't know why everybody's telling me he's going to catch a ton of passes. Like he's had 4 targets for 3 receptions and about a game's worth of work this season. And I would project him for somewhere around 2 or 3 receptions. So I think there's a lot of holes you could poke in him. I think that a guy like Carlos Hyde, and I have no interest in Carlos Hyde, but he's 1% owned. And Carlos Hyde grades out pretty similar to Brian Hill in all accounts in terms of overall touches. Maybe you give Brian Hill an extra reception and a half, but 16 touches on the ground is what Carlos Hyde is averaging this season. A matchup that is, if anything, neutral, if not favorable for him. So, yeah, it's a spot that Brian Hill, like half the ownership, maybe even a third of it is what I would want of him. It's not a spot that I have to follow a lot of people because at the end of the day, what does Brian Hill do for you if you don't play him? If he scores 14 points, he does good for the people that have him, but it doesn't burn you and bury you in tournaments. I don't think Brian Hill's going to score 20 and knock me out of the water in tournaments this weekend. So I might as well just try and get an edge where I can, and not playing 33% of him seems like a pretty decent edge.
Do you think people are emphasizing on last week with kind of the volume that he received, but really just not understanding if he doesn't catch that 10-yard touchdown catch? I mean, he really did nothing. And a majority of his carries came in the second half when they were up, when they didn't have to pass. They were just running out the clock or trying to get out of New Orleans with a W. And in doing so, they ran a lot. The first half, he was really nowhere to be found in the whole game plan. And so my question to you is, based on this ownership as well, but with also this game flow, do you think there's also a possibility that Carolina really gets out in front, because I think they are the better team by a mile, And that really just eliminates Brian Hill out of the game plan, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you told me Brian Hill was going to get 20 carries in this matchup, I would love him, but I think he might get 14 more times than not. So he's a 6 point underdog who doesn't have the greatest or a track record of being a pass catching running back. And I think you hit the nail on the head. He catches a 10-yard reception, which is 8 fantasy points for him last week. And that kind of skews a lot of the things on his output. 20 carries in a tough matchup. So I'm not really holding him accountable for 3 yards per carry there. Small sample against a good opponent, but it's all about the volume and then the ownership. So the price point is not even cheap relative to what these Falcons running backs have been priced at. Devonta Freeman has been priced at the $5,000 price point for about 5 straight weeks now. So the fact that Brian Hill is in the $4,800 range, people think they're getting a discount on him because he's like the new fill-in. He's already priced up for his role. Like if he was 3,800, 4,200, yeah, the ownership for me would make a little bit more sense. But at $4,800, he's priced for his role. And sure, a fine matchup, but he's more than a third of the lineups have him right now. And he's not a pass catching running back as a 6 point underdog. So there's a lot of holes you could poke in him. I think that some of the pivot options, though, have gone away, like JD McKissick. The upside of him has gone away with Ty Johnson practicing. Jordan Howard's injury maybe leaves him out of the water. So a lot of the kind of pivot plays are not there anymore. One that does stand out, though, is Miles Sanders, whether Jordan Howard plays or not. Like there's no Alshon Jeffrey, there's no Deshaun Jackson, potentially no Howard. And now Zach Ertz is just going to face double teams nonstop in this game against the Patriots. Miles Sanders seems like a guy primed to catch 5 or 6 balls in this upcoming matchup and a pivot option if you did want to get there. But either way, like the 4K running back range is not something I'm targeting.
One thing I was told early on in the DFS, season, I guess you could say, was you never take a running back as a big dog on the road. Do you hold true to that statement?
So I think it. So yes, I think the statement makes sense, and I believe in it with some caveats. Like if you're a pass catching running back, you're fine because you're independent. But we don't really have a sample to say if Brian Hill's a pass catching running back or not. The sample that I have is that he catches a ball every 10 routes run, which in this game would lead to him catching 2 or 3 passes, which I think is what most people are going to project him for. So yeah, no, I don't think that this is a good spot for him, and I don't think he positively fits into that. Now, if you're a McCaffrey and you're down 6 on the road, like I don't think it matters. You're game flow independent. So it's a little bit of a caveat if you catch passes and stay on the field the whole game. And honestly, Brian Hill, he could get games flowed out here. We don't know what's behind him in Kenyon Barner, potentially Olsen, the 5th round pick out of Pittsburgh will be active for this one. He might catch 5 passes. We really don't have a big enough sample, but I'm projecting him for about 2.5 right now.
All right, our next guy in the same game, opposite team, same position, CMC, 10.5K, but that's not preventing anyone from going to him because 31.3% are projected to go ahead and roster McCaffrey. McCaffrey's kind of breaking this threshold of basically it doesn't matter what his salary is because he's going to perform. And so at this ownership, are you with him given how high this price point now has reached?
Yeah, I'm definitely with him. Like it's up there, but he is the same price as last week where he dropped 29, and he should have probably had a 40-point week last week. Kyle Allen underthrew him on a 2-yard touchdown pass, which put them in like the 36 range at a minimum there if the game doesn't go to overtime. But yeah, I'm with him again here. It's just as good of a matchup as you're going to get. I have him projected right now for 28 touches in this game. And that might be a little bit high, but I don't really think that it is for the matchup against Atlanta. 28.5 team total. And I'm projecting an extra possession for each team in this one. It's the fastest paced game on the slate right now, slightly ahead of Dallas and Detroit for me. So, yeah, I'm going to get to a lot of McCaffrey. He'll probably be my highest owned running back if I had to guess. The 33% of the 31% that he's at right now. I might even be a little bit above that, but that sounds about right.
Any concern about another do-over of what they did last week against the Saints D? And I'm speaking on behalf of this Atlanta Falcons defense that really came out of nowhere last week.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think that, yeah, it was kind of odd. They had, 6 sacks in that game coming off a bye when your head coach is in a position of maybe being fired and on the hot seat. So they looked a little bit better, or definitely a lot better last week. We'll see if it continues. I would like to say it doesn't here, but even if it does, just his ability to be a dual threat in that backfield is really what makes it easier. Even if Kyle Allen faces a lot of pressure, you could even argue that it's better for Christian McCaffrey in terms of the receiving game for more dump offs.
Next guy up, Josh Jacobs, 6,900, going to be at home in a dream matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, 30.2%. I really don't see how you cannot roster Jacobs here at 6,900. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, Josh Jacobs is a great play. Like he seems like somebody you don't avoid in cash lineups, and everything Cincinnati against running backs, they've been poor this year in terms of rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions, whatever it might be. Most rushing yards per game, fantasy points per game, top three given up. It's just a really good spot for Jacobs, who's averaging 21 opportunities per game. Consistently catches like 1 to 2, maybe even 3 balls a game. So there's somewhat of a bonus there for him, but it's not something that will have a ceiling. It's mainly on the ground. The only concern I do have with Jacobs, and it's nowhere near, it's a loose comparison to David Montgomery last week. This is a way better offense, a way better running back, way better offensive line, but he's not as active in the passing game. So you are relying on the 100-yard bonus, 2 touchdown or 1 touchdown type of day, probably just one to win a tournament. At that price point, I think it's fine though. But when it comes up to 30%, trying to just try and poke holes in guys, McCaffrey, I really don't think there are any. We talked about Hill having a lot of holes. The only thing I would say about Jacobs is he's a huge favorite, so he should be able to get his in a good matchup. But if he gets kept out of the end zone here, he could be a big letdown. Touchdowns are variant. I still like him this week, but that's the only thing at 30% I could poke holes in him at.
5 targets last game for Jacobs, 3 catches, 30 yards. But before that, he gets about 3 targets per game. Doesn't find the end zone, but I mean, at least it adds somewhat. Not Christian McCaffrey like, but yeah, I mean, if he received a little bit more targets, I guess I could see what you're saying. I think the biggest concern with me is that he's not on the field as much as like a CMC or maybe an Ezekiel Elliott or a Dalvin Cook. 30 out of 58 snaps, 42 out of 72. 37 of 66. So, I mean, he's about 50% on the field. And so I guess that would probably be the only thing that concerns me because, obviously you want him on the field as much as possible. And him not being on the field also kind of takes away from that passing game, like you mentioned. So, but the matchup is a dream matchup. Cincinnati Bengals defense is just completely horrible. And I don't see how he doesn't get there this week, given that price point.
Yeah, exactly. It's similar to McCaffrey. It's a good player in a great spot at a fair price point. So the ownership makes sense. I'm fine going right there with it. And I trust McCaffrey a lot more for obvious reasons, but Jacobs at 30%, it seems like fair ownership.
DJ Moore, next man up, going back to this Carolina game, which, like you said, should be fast paced, shootout potential. 29.3%. It's really hard to ignore this guy's price point given the volume that he's getting because he is Kyle Allen's main target, man. He's getting double digit targets, a lot of volume going his way. Are you okay with being with the field or more, or where are you going with him at this?
Yeah, so DJ Moore is one of my just favorite plays at wide receiver in the week, and it seems like everybody else is finally noticing that he continues to be underpriced even as the price point comes up. So, yeah, he sees 9 targets a game, and I mentioned this last week, I believe, on this show, but 9 targets a game, and that's up from last week because he got double-digit targets against the Packers. Had probably his best game in his career last week against the Packers, looked really good, and he sees 10.7 air yards per target. So he's in this middle range of sort of where Chris Godwin is, and they get a lot of volume, and it's catchable volume. It's not these deep passes down the field that are just over your heads and the air yards don't really matter. So it's chunk plays that actually have consistency to them. So yeah, DJ Moore at 29%. It's higher than I would like on an 11-game slate, but the price point's still cheap. He's in a dream matchup against probably Isaiah Oliver. I was expecting to come in somewhere like around this 25% range. So yeah, the ownership on him is fine. When it gets up there for a wide receiver, it gets a little bit more worrisome if he's not like a Michael Thomas or a sure thing for his receptions and work. But this is as good of a matchup right there with Tampa as the best matchup you can have. So 29% is maybe a little bit high for me, but I'll probably still have him in like a quarter or fifth of my lineups.
Yeah, even though they didn't find the end zone last week, I mean, Michael Thomas still got there. He's still 8, and I think he had 14 targets, 152 yards. I mean, caught 13 of those balls. So I don't imagine that this is a matchup that'll be tough for Moore. And I mean, he also has big play potential. So and he's like a Christian Kirk, I would say. When I kind of see these two, that these kind of two kind of are the same types of receivers. So I really like him at that price point. I think this matchup is great. I don't mind any of these Carolina wideouts. Dalvin Cook next up, 8,900 at home against Denver, 27.7%. You get a little bit of a discount when it comes to him against McCaffrey, saving about 1,600 here. Any thought of if you don't go McCaffrey, do you pivot to Cook? Where are you at with Cook here?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to pivot to Zeke. Partially ownership, partially matchup. So
Damn, man, you're taking my play, man. Come on. Come
yeah,
on,
so
man.
Like his ownership at 27%, if you don't get to McCaffrey, if you want to get a quarter of your lineups with Dalvin Cook and you're not playing a lot of McCaffrey, yeah, that's totally fine. Like we've seen this guy's caught what 8 balls coming off of an 8 catch game, had 6 receptions against the Bears. No matter how tough the matchup, he's shown that he's game flow independent and he's a pretty quality and even above average and really good pass catching running back. So yeah, I'm not going to say 27% Dalvin Cook is a wrong number. I think it's absolutely fine actually, but they're 10-point favorites. The game script should be that he just rushes the ball, sees a ton of goal line carries, 25 touches, and it's a good spot. But if I'm going to just try and get some sort of leverage and not go to McCaffrey, you have Zeke at 6% ownership in a game where he's dudded now for people on national TV a couple of weeks out of the last 3, and people are giving up on him, but it's still a solid matchup against the Lions. And he's projected right now for me for I think like a half a point less than Dalvin Cook. And when I see that similar of a projection and there's a 20% difference in ownership, it's just an easy pivot in a lot of my ownership. So I'll still have Dalvin Cook shares, but it's probably more Zeke.
Could you see people going Hill, McCaffrey, Cook as their running backs in their lineup?
I think a lot of people are going to go Hill, McCaffrey, and Jacobs, like those top 3 guys, which makes
Yeah.
sense just because of the ownership. I really don't think a lot of people will go 2 top end guys just because of what you have at wide receiver at the top end. There's a lot of tempting names up there this week. So yeah, I don't think so. Like if we were to do like sort of a lineup study rewind and see at the end of the week what that would look like, maybe we can find a comparable slate. But I think it would be very low owned. And I was actually playing around with that with Zeke and McCaffrey, but I just don't like Hill enough to get there. I was trying it with Miles Sanders a little bit, and you can still build some pretty good lineups. And obviously, you have the upside. But with Josh Jacobs, even we'll talk about Kevin Coleman later on the slate. I don't know the actual upside in doing that.
Zeke projected 5.9% on DraftKings, and we'll get to him because I think as we go over now to FanDuel, he shows up on that list a little bit different than DK. I think he's in the top 10, top 12 owned. But as we go over to FanDuel, same guys at the top: Cook, McCaffrey, Moore, and Hill and Jacobs. 5 of the top 6. The guy who is kind of disrupting that order is Leonard Fournette, 7,200. Going to be on the road at Indianapolis, 29.5%. We know he's a volume workhorse. And I'm sure that this price point is what's intriguing to a lot of these people who are wanting to roster him in this ownership percentage. Is Leonard Fournette a top play for you this week?
So he's not a top play just because of the 6K range at running back and then priorities around McCaffrey at the top end. But yeah, he's still a guy who's seeing 25 opportunities per game. He's just 2 opportunities per game behind McCaffrey for the league lead right now. So the inefficiency has been there from really his offensive line and the way that teams play the Jaguars. So maybe with Nick Foles back, that changes. You get the 8-man box 36.2% of the time. He's stuffed 23% of the time because of that mostly. So it's just what we always say about Fournette: volume over efficiency. So he continues to be a fine play if he's going to see 6 targets a game and 19 carries a game. At that ownership, I think it's okay because of what the price point is, and it makes sense. On DraftKings, where he's lower owned and not that expensive either in the 7K range, I think it's okay there too. There's just other priorities for me on this slate, but I actually, whenever you're going to get 25 opportunities per game from a running back, you kind of feel good about wherever the ownership comes in.
I think the Colts have surrendered, if I'm not mistaken, 1 touchdown to the running back position over like the last 3 or 4 weeks. So, they haven't given up too much on the ground in yardage as well. So a little bit of a more of a stout rushing D than maybe some would think when you look into it. So I'm not saying that he's matchup proof, but I will say that given barring that ownership, there's all things to consider. And I'd rather have McCaffrey or Cook, or more importantly, Ezekiel Elliott, who is 20.9% on the road at Detroit. Uh, in my opinion, before I give it to you, this is a really good matchup for Zeke. And I think this is a bounce back game. Let's hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a good matchup. I think the only concern with the matchup for me is that we saw it last week. Detroit's been banged up on defense all season long on their defensive line. And last week they got Mike Daniels back finally after 6 weeks of not having him, one of the better defensive tackles and run stoppers in the entire league. And that probably, I didn't go back and look at the actual tackles and stuff, but that probably was a big reason why, and also getting 2 other defensive tackles back and healthy, why David Montgomery didn't have the type of game a lot of people are expecting from him. And maybe skill set also goes into with that. But yeah, that's a little bit of the concern here. But you're not taking as big of a risk where he's not the 30% owned top end guy or 40% owned Dalvin Cook at a similar price point. So even on FanDuel, you're getting Ezekiel Elliott right now at half the ownership at Dalvin Cook. So yeah, it's a pivot play wherever you play him this week. And anytime you can get Zeke as sort of the leverage play at the same price point, in my opinion, once again, they project out pretty much the exact same for me. Yeah, I think that just game theory wise, Zeke makes for a lot of sense here where you can leverage the field about half the time if he outscores Dalvin Cook.
I love the call on the leverage play because on DraftKings, I think he's exactly that. But when I look into it deeper outside of like their bottom 7 ranked defensive DVOA, and they've given up the 5th most touchdowns to the running back position, the thing where I look in the most is, Dallas has the 4th best run blocking offensive line. And they're going against the team that doesn't blitz and they don't put men in the box. They rank last in blitzing at 12.5%. Which entails to a lot of 3-man rushes that they do. And I feel like that bodes well for an already good established offensive line. And I think that a lot of emphasis will be on Prescott. I think these wide receivers who I think are also great plays. I think everyone from the Cowboys is a great play when I really look into it. But I think what we'll see is the containment or trying to focus on Cooper and Gallup and Cobb and that 3-man rush. I think it's going to bode well for the running game for Zeke. I think there's going to be a lot of open holes, and I think they're going to feed him. And so, outside of last game, he's been very productive this season. So, with DraftKings and the ownership, I think it's like you mentioned. I think he's a really good leverage play, and I think he's being overlooked because of these other guys.
Yeah, and I think on DraftKings, like where his salary is, it's scaring people off because he hasn't been producing at least consistency like a 9K running back, or at least hitting the ceilings of a 9K running back. So even that said, like it's just a leverage play that makes sense when you're that low owned and just grading out similar to the guys who are levels multipliers more than you in ownership.
Brian Hill, 5,900, 29.1%, man, on FanDuel. Uh, I can't do it. It's just for me, I'd rather go to other areas than for someone who, first off, I'm unknown. And someone mentioned in chat earlier, Sal, about Carolina, how atrocious their run defense is. And it is. I mean, there is no denying that. I think in the last, 4 weeks, they've given up 120 yards per game on the ground, 2.5 rushing touchdowns on the ground. And out of everyone in the league, Kansas City comes in second at 8 touchdowns to the running backs over the last 4 weeks. Carolina has given up 12. So I get it. Like people are like thinking how great of the matchup it is for the running back. But first off, we don't really know this guy's talent. So far, when he has played, the yards per carry isn't there. This is a pass heavy team. And in my opinion, I think that they will be down. I think that they'll have to play from behind, which will hurt the production of Brian Hill. And I think he gets phased out of this game flow throughout the game. So when it comes to FanDuel, though, it's not PPR. It's completely different. So if you're relying on, him in the passing game, do you feel confident, or are you against the field, at a 30% basically on FanDuel with Brian Hill?
Yeah, I'm against it there too. So yeah, I understand the sentiment around the Carolina Panthers dead last in like the DVOA ranking. And it really depends on where you look at it. If you look at it on Pro Football Focus, where it weights touchdowns a little bit differently, then they are a not as great team. And I actually lean with that a little bit more. You can say what you want about DVOA. I think it's a great stat, but it will influence in touchdowns. And they've given up 14 rushing touchdowns this year, but they've given up the least receiving yards to running back. They're 10th most rushing yards. So although they grade out really bad as a defense, a lot of it is skewed by touchdowns allowed, which there is something to that. But at the same time, there's also not. Like a lot of that will be just randomness around the goal line. So the difference between giving up 14 touchdowns and 8 rushing touchdowns, it's surely just not having a good run defense for part of it. But if you're just going to be banking on rushing touchdowns for Brian Hill, then I will surely take my money in the 30% ownership and just absolutely fade it. So yeah, I think the matchup is the only thing you can hang your hat on with Hill because he's priced where he should be. He's a guy who's a 6-point underdog who does not have the surest or any history of being a pass catching running back. So yeah, if you want to hang your hat on just the fact that Carolina's allowed a lot of rushing touchdowns this year, and you want to bet on variants of touchdowns, what that pretty much boils down to for Brian Hill, I'll just personally not bet with a third of the field on those touchdowns.
All right, you guys, we're going to go now into the game by game, get Sal's top plays, see where he's at, get these final thoughts rolling. But before we do, we want to remind you guys, if you haven't signed up for Awesemo.com yet, if you haven't used any of the tools and resources, the projections, the articles behind the paywall, the boom bust tool, all the great tools and resources used by the number 1 player in the world himself, Alex Baker, who created them. and allows us to use them as well. So we're all using in conjunction these same tools. Use the code strategy show, get yourself 50% off your first month. And if you're trying to figure out, and excuse me, the promo code is NFL strategy. I messed that up. But if you are wanting to know how and where these tools are and what they do, go to osmo.com/NFL. Go check out the videos. Go see the breakdown of everything. So that way you know exactly what you're getting before you get involved. Okay. Once again, promo code NFL strategy. All right, Sal. First game, Cowboys, Lions. Lions are 6-point dogs at home. We spoke about Ezekiel Elliott already, so we don't have to go back there. But any other plays from this game that you're looking at?
Yeah, I like Dallas stacks. I'll probably have them as like a top 3 or 4 own stack there. They're overpriced in spots and maybe appropriately priced, with Amari being a top end wide receiver price. Michael Gallup even priced up to the mid 6K range, and then Dak up there. But none of them are getting ownership. So you really can have like 10% or 8% of this stack, or really just Dak, and then your stack should follow that. And you'll be twice the field if you have like 8% of Dak here, twice the field on Dak, and like 4 times the field on this stack. So I do like Amari, Gallup, and Dak stacks. You kind of have to prioritize your lineup differently because it is an expensive stack, but I'm okay going there. The issue comes in with if you're trying to game stack it on the other side. JD McKissick looked like a nice value run back option, maybe even just one-off wide running back play, but Ty Johnson practiced fully on Friday with a concussion. He hasn't been technically cleared yet, but it seems like he's going to be cleared. So it makes it really tough to run back that stack, and that's what I'll have to try and figure out. I might still run it back with some JD McKissick, who's been productive at his price point. But at the same time, I might just have just team stacks of Dallas this week. And on the Detroit side of it, nothing really stands out. McKissick is sort of a tournament flyer play instead of something I had some sort of confidence in when it looked like he was going to be the main guy earlier in the week.
Before, sorry to interrupt this real quick, but a guy in chat, and I don't know if he's trolling right now, but this guy David Lazowski says that he's Laz gets fit. And you remember this week we've been talking about him. Do you remember?
No,
Laffy
no.
and Manny in the first show of the week, they were breaking down this guy Laz because of how he plays with running defenses against his stacks. So he's playing like defenses. He had the Colts defense against Mahomes, and like it is. He's he's saying that it's him. This guy's a legend. So I'm not joking. The way that this guy's a legend. Hey, Laz, if you can, message us on Twitter, because I know Laffy wanted to get you on the show. But Sal, I just have to tell you real quick. This guy, he came in second in the Millie Maker in like 2015. And then this past week, they pulled up lineup study and they were going over lineups. And this guy, he played, I want to say, every single quarterback on the slate, even Andy Dalton. Okay. He had every single quarterback. And then he had defenses against that quarterback. So he was playing like the Colts against the Chiefs. It was pretty wild.
Did it work out?
Yeah, he won. That's the thing.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's pretty
I know
awesome.
that Luffy was telling me, I never went back and saw it, but he was telling me to check out the Monday show. And he was just telling me that it'll be worth it. Like, and I'm assuming that's what they went over. So I'm going
Oh,
to.
man. Well, we appreciate you. If that's really you, man, and you're not a troll, welcome. We appreciate you stopping by. Um, any other person, I know you spoke about a lot in this passing game. Now, if it's a blowout, and we see the Cowboys really get ahead in this game, Jeff Driscoll, it took 46 attempts to throw 269 yards. It's kind of hard to believe that the Cowboys will have a second straight game of where they kind of really crumble defensively. I think that this is a bounce back game for this defense. But and I'm not sure if you spoke on this, and I'm sorry if you did, but any love for Jones or Galladay in this passing game if you're predicting a blowout and you're trying to run back any of these wideouts?
Yeah, no, I would go to Jones if anything there, but I just really don't trust Driscoll to like keep a guy afloat. But that's the thing, like you don't need a full stack of the line, so I'd probably go to Jones if anything. It seemed like he had similar chemistry with Jones as he did Galladay. Galladay just ends up catching the deep sort of Hail Mary heave from Jeff Driscoll for a touchdown last week, in which he also pushed off. So it was just everything went proper for them for that to work out. But Driscoll and Cash actually is somewhat interesting. He's like a 7th or 8th option as like a cash quarterback. So basically means I'm not getting to him, but he has rushing upside and he's dirt cheap. So if he gets you like 14 fantasy points, you probably like that at the price tag. But for tournaments, there's really not much here. It kind of makes it difficult for me to get much more volume on a Dallas stack because I like the game stack and like, I don't know, McKissick and maybe shares of Marvin Jones, but that doesn't really give me much upside in my opinion.
All right, next game, Jaguars, Colts. Kind of spoke about the volume. Keen, Leonard Fournette himself already, and a little bit about this Colts defense. But Nick Foles is back now. Minshew Mania has kind of been pushed to the side. Foles is coming in. He's going to have his favorite target that he had in preseason, and D.D. Westbrook back and healthy. Took off that London trip and also had a bye week, so he should be ready to rip. Where are we going here in this game if we're going anywhere at all?
Yeah, so I think that we talked about Fournette earlier in terms of ownership, and that's okay to get to. I think that D.D. Westbrook is the guy that I would want to get to, if anything, here. And it's just really low like interest. It's a secondary option. Not much stands out. He's fine in like a lower end cash play or even a lower end tournament play, but not much on the Jaguars side stands out for me personally. It's really just some shares of DD. Chris Conley, honestly, is a like GPP flyer at a low price point and just no ownership. That he had some chemistry in the preseason and the first drive of the game with Foles before he got injured. Such a small sample to really trust, though. So yeah, it's really just D.D. Westbrook, and then Fournette. I think the ownership is okay on him on DraftKings to get to some.
I really love the call of Didi, man. He's 3.8% projected right now on DraftKings, 4,500. And I think he's going to have a quarterback that we know that can throw, and they do have somewhat of a connection. And if they can reestablish that right away against the Colts, I don't mind that play one bit. Outside of that, though, uh, obviously we spoke about Leonard Fournette. Don't mind him. The volume's going to be there, so it's not one thing you have to worry about. And one guy that's been disappointing, man, has been Marlon Mack. He doesn't play a ton of the snaps. And last week, he was in such a dream matchup. I'm not sure if you rostered him, but there were definitely some GBP lineups where I thought Mac was in a great spot. At home, a heavy favorite against a really weak Miami Dolphins defense. But the Jaguars, they have a slightly below average running defense. It's nothing that, is an optimal play. But they do give over one rushing touchdown per game on the ground. But Marlon Mack, man, he hasn't topped 100 yards in 5 games. It's kind of difficult, but do you have any love whatsoever if someone's multi-entering for Marlon Mack?
No, well, yeah, if you're multi-entering with like 150, then I would have shares of it, but like, I don't know, 4%, 5%. It's not somewhere where I want to prioritize. Something to point out is Jordan Wilkins won't be playing in this one. He usually sees a couple carries, 10% of the snap. So if the game flow as a favorite here for Max stays that way and it's neutral and he's not played off the field because they're behind with Naeem Hines, then yeah, you should see probably like 2 or 3 extra carries than usual for a guy who already gets heavy volume in Marlon Mack. So I do think he's interesting this week, at which probably going to be no ownership. The only worry for me is last week they get down 10-0, and they, like you said, he came off the field. You had a guy in Naeem Hines play just as many snaps as him, where earlier in the season, we were seeing Marlon Mack stay game flow dependent running routes the first 2 or 3 weeks of the year, but now he's not doing that. So, yeah, Mack's not a guy that I'm going to be rostering in like my 3 max or even 20 max. If you're playing 150, get the sum. Jordan Wilkins being out probably goes unnoticed, but it will give him like a 2 carry bump up in his overall projection, probably. So, yeah, not the greatest of plays, but probably contrarian, if anything.
All right, Denver at Minnesota. Spoke about Dalvin Cook heavily already, and kind of our stance on him and ownership, and kind of where we see him producing. Uh, this is a game where I really like the Vikings defense, Sal, to disrupt Brandon Allen, and with really how good this running defense is of the Vikings, I kind of just eliminate Lindsey and Freeman out of this picture, and I think it's going to be really tough for Brandon Allen to succeed. I could be wrong, but do you see yourself going to anywhere outside of Dalvin Cook in this game?
Yeah, no, nowhere outside of Cook. Maybe you take so the only other thing that stands out a little bit is Irv Smith Jr., the rookie tight end, who's very versatile. Will line up in the slot, will line up in the backfield. He's one of their better picks and really a diamond in the rough for going unnoticed this year. What his production's been in this sort of an offense fits perfectly. But he ran the most routes of his career first season, so the season last week, and he played on the most snaps. It's slowly been coming up all year. He's pretty good for a 3-catch, 30-yard game. If you get him in the end zone and his snaps and routes continue to stabilize high, there's a better chance that happens. So he's more so a punt tight end. And if you're not paying up for like Waller this week, you're probably just naturally punting the position. He's one of those like 4 or 5 guys that I'll have scrambled in as a punt tight end. But yeah, no Stephon Diggs, even with Adam Thielen out, he'll probably get Chris Harris Jr. Harris Jr. held Allen Robinson to 2 catches for 13 yards, Devontae Adams to 2 catches for 36 yards, T.Y. Hilton 2 catches 54. And last week, Odell actually had an okay game in a shadow, caught 4 balls for 81 yards, but one of those catches made up about 60% of the yardage in production. So Chris Harris Jr., aside from one just play where Odell beats him and a top wide receiver to do that. He's been pretty shut down all season. So it's just Dalvin Cook. And I literally have written down for Denver in bold. I don't want anything from this team. That is my note on Denver.
Well, the next game might be a little bit different because a lot of weapons, shootout potential. Last time these two quarterbacks met, they racked up 8 touchdowns combined in college on prime time. But Houston Texans at Ravens. Ravens -4 right now. Go ahead and break it down, man. This is a big game.
Yeah, it's a big game, but it's a little bit interesting for me to say that I don't really have much interest in a Deshaun Watson this week, and maybe he's contrarian. I don't think the field has interest in him or Hopkins. So you have a spot where this Ravens secondary went from being the first 3-4 weeks of the season, probably a bottom 5 at best, bottom like 8 secondary in the league, to now being like a top 3, top 5 secondary. You require, first off, you get back healthy Jimmy Smith. You have Earl Thomas coming into the season, first year there. You end up acquiring Marcus Peters, and he's having a career year better than when he was in Kansas City. So this is just a really stout secondary. Will Fuller continues to be questionable. We'll see if he plays. And it's just a spot where I think this secondary overpowers the weapons there. You'll have Marlon Humphrey, who has been a top 5 cornerback when playing on the outside this season. He'll probably come out of the slot and go on DeAndre Hopkins, which is fine for DeAndre. He's kind of matchup proof, but rather not pay top dollar for him against a top 5 cornerback. So yeah, from Houston, the only thing that really stands out is Carlos Hyde is like a pivot play off of a Brian Hill. I'm probably not going to do it, but I think it's at least worth mentioning. They're the same price, and Carlos Hyde averages 17.7 opportunities per game. I'm projecting him right now for 15.5 touches, which is right around what I'm projecting Brian Hill for. More upside in the passing game, probably for Hill. But you get a neutral run blocking advantage. People think the Ravens are like a top 5 run defense still. They're ranked 16th overall in that department. So Hyde's the only thing from Houston that stands out. And at best, I'll probably he's at 1% owned. You have like 2 or 3%. You have a decent amount of leverage, and it doesn't hurt your lineups. Baltimore side, it's the same as always. Lamar's priced up, but if you want to get to him in any format, you can. You just have to prioritize it. He's now priced for sort of his 30-point production weeks. So if he doesn't get you there in a little bit of a tougher matchup, it's worrisome. Tayshaun Gibson, their safety, who's been very good in coverage against tight ends, is potentially going to miss. He's questionable. I'm going to watch that closely, and I urge a lot of people to. If he ends up missing, Mark Andrews, who seems overpriced, becomes just a really good play against a backup safety and a lot of coverage plays. So it's really just Lamar in some spots, not much. And then Mark Andrews is probably the most I get from this one.
Yeah, that Marquise Brown status, it really plays a toll in a lot of ways in this game because the Texans, they give up the most yards after catch. They give up a lot of big plays through the air. And obviously Brown is the speedster that can burn you and get those deep plays. And I think that also hurts Lamar in this matchup because I think the more throughout the season, we're going to see defenses really try to contain him as much as they can, even though it's been really difficult right now. But it's something where I would like to see Brown play. Hopkins, he's been different since Fuller's been out. He's been seeing double-digit targets. He's found the end zone twice. He's being more productive than with Fuller on the field. And that makes sense because Fuller has definitely have gone off a few games to where it's taken away from Hopkins' production. So if you're looking at this game, if Fuller plays, I don't like Hopkins as much, but if Fuller's off, I'm okay with Hopkins. When it comes to Lamar, he's projected right now 10% ownership on DK. Do you consider it a leverage play given how small the ownership is and kind of what people are predicting for this game flow to be like?
Nah, I mean, for his ceiling, I guess there's some leverage around it, but like 10% is like normal, if not high ownership for a quarterback. So I think it's okay if you want to get there. You're probably just matching the field. I don't think you have to go crazy. I probably get there as just a naked quarterback, if anything. I think that what you're banking on is he just rushes for 100 yards or 80 plus yards and a touchdown, as he's been doing, averaging 78 rushing yards per game this season. So it's just a spot where he's now priced $1,000 or $1,500 more than other quarterbacks who have the same 25, 28 point upside as him. They just don't have the 35, 38 point upside. But now that's what you're paying for at the price tag. So he's just not one of my top 5 priorities like last week when he was probably the priority on the slate.
Before we leave this game, one question. If you're choosing between Lamar or Deshaun, who do you go with?
I go with Lamar there. I know the price point is much steeper, but I just think it's more upside. I love Deshaun Watson. It's just this week, his weapons and their one-on-one matchups, it's going to be tough. Like, so you have Marcus Peters is having a better season than Marlon Humphrey, and no disrespect to Humphrey, he's had to play in the slot where he's not comfortable playing, but only a 58 pass rating against Marcus Peters, 4 interceptions, 2 pick sixes, 21 catches for 271 yards is all he's given up. And then obviously you don't have to put out the stats for Humphrey being a top cornerback, 79 rating against. secondary is just so locked down with Earl Thomas. It's really hard to think that if Will Fuller doesn't play, that this team can move the ball with enough upside to win you a tournament. Obviously, they have a good offense and there's a good total on this one for them, or a fine total, but one where I think they're going to have DeAndre Hopkins against 3 top cornerbacks wherever he's on the field. It's really tough to see him coming out there, and Lamar Jackson on the ground alone can outscore Deshaun Watson this week.
I think comparing secondaries, I rank the Ravens higher than the Texans, and I think it'll be somewhat easier to move the ball through the air for Lamar, given his dual threat ability, rather than the other dual threat of Watson. So I would give the edge to Lamar Jackson as well. Next game, not really much scoring here. Complete polar opposite of what we just discussed about weapons. But the Jets are going into Washington. Redskins are -1 currently. Dwayne Haskins is going to be behind center. Although, even though he's so cheap, and I don't want to hear people saying that he's a value play, I wouldn't play him in cash. But in 4 games, he's throwing no touchdowns, and he's only threw 284 passing yards. So is there any love here for anyone in this game that doesn't really look too appealing?
Yeah, so on Washington side, none at all. You're going to have Geis probably suiting up here, which just makes it much tougher to predict if Adrian Peterson or him touches the ball at all in a tough matchup against the Jets. So no interest in the backfield. Terry McLaurin is at too steep of a price point for me to trust him with his quarterback being Dwayne Haskins. So I'm not going to get there either. And it's just a great matchup for him because no Tremaine Johnson, even if Darrell Roberts is going to play off the injury report, still a good matchup where Darius Slayton just crushed last week for the Giants against these Jets on the outside. But he had a quarterback that could actually get him the ball. And this week, Dwayne Haskins, I don't even know if he throws 25 times. They just have not been letting him throw. He doesn't look, and his prospects coming out of college where he can't throw the deep ball, and you have Terry McLaurin who is going to thrive on that. So it doesn't add up all that well for upside. So nothing from Washington. For the Jets, yeah, I don't really like much here. So Robbie Anderson, we keep saying boomer bust, of course, but this week seems very much so bust against Quentin Dunbar, who's been the best player on the Redskins all around, even better than McLaurin. 52.6 pass rating against his top 5 in the NFL. Very quietly, just having a shutdown corner season. 22 receptions for 241 yards so far this season in 8 games. I mean, those are great numbers. 3 receptions and 34 yards per game he's allowed. Don't want Anderson. Jamison Crowder's been surviving on touchdowns. And usually when you play him, if you wanted to win a tournament with him, he has to score touchdowns because he needs so much volume. But now you're paying for a priced up Jamison Crowder at 5,700, where once again, he's going to have to score you a touchdown to survive. And I'm just going to bet against the variance here that he's been scoring touchdowns. I don't think he's going to score one every week. So I probably don't get to a top dollar Crowder. Le'Veon Bell at 5%, questionable for this week. Seems all indications are that he plays. 47 touches over the last 2 weeks. I actually like getting to him as sort of a pivot play if you're not playing McCaffrey and you just want to build totally different lineups. It seems a little bit out there, though, based on the other pricing around him. But Bell at 5%, I'd feel okay coming in around 10% for a guy who has seen, again, 47 touches, 12 receptions over the last 2 games since he sat down with his head coach and said, hey, I want to get more involved in the offense.
Man, I got to be honest here. I kind of like a few players from this game.
Oh,
Um,
which ones?
I love McLaurin, and it's nothing that about Haskins is the only thing that really scares me. If Keenum was playing, I think I would feel a lot more confident, just because he's established some of the rhythm with McLaurin throughout the year so far, and he's able to throw. I haven't really seen that arm yet from Haskins outside of what we've seen from college. So, but McLaurin, man, Jets secondary banged up. They're not good. They struggle defensively so bad against the pass. I'm not worried about their rushing defense. It's the passing defense that, if you want to go ahead and attack, that's where you attack them, and specifically in the slot. So I just feel that there will be big play opportunities for McLaurin, and I think on the other side too, I think Crowder. So I think these 2 wide receivers are for sure in play. Crowder's price is steeping a little bit on FanDuel, which kind of scares me because he is almost 7K. He's at 6,500, but this game's going to go one of 2 ways. It's either going to be completely garbage or maybe a shootout, just like the Giants game. I mean, when you have 2 bad teams, there's either no offense or a lot of offense because of how bad these defenses are. So I don't mind if you're multi-entering and you're looking to dabble. These 2 guys I would feel somewhat confident in. Crowder specifically, he is a target machine. He is someone that Darnold relies on and trusts in the passing game, and he's found the end zone the last few games as well. So these 2 guys are definitely on my list for max entering.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that's positive for McLaurin is if you do have any confidence in McLaurin or in Haskins just being able to get him the ball, and he should be his main priority in the passing game, he's only 3% owned right now, at least on DraftKings. So it's not like your stance has to be killing your lineups if it doesn't go well. You can have 8% of McLaurin and be almost triple the field. And if it goes totally bad, your lineups are still probably fine. So you just get good leverage at a guy who has high upside at low ownership. I still just don't trust Haskins enough. But if you told me I had to have 6% McLaurin and I'm double the field, it's still a spot where I feel okay with.
I agree, man. It's hard to trust Haskins, but I mean they're gonna have to throw at some points throughout the game, and I guess the only thing is we just hope that McLaurin can get those targets. Next game, kind of the same story as well with offense. Buffalo at Miami. Buffalo coming off that loss at Cleveland, and we talked about it last week. I mean, this Buffalo Bills team is really suspect and kind of a fraud. They haven't beat anyone this year outside of that one win at Tennessee. But if you look at their schedule, they're just they haven't played anyone, and now they're going to be playing again the Dolphins. The Dolphins were in Buffalo not too long ago, where they were kind of dominating. The first 2.5, 3 quarters of that game, and then a couple errors by Fitzpatrick gave red zone opportunities to the Bills, and they were able to pull out with a 10-point win. However, though, we talked about it before the show. And, I'm going to go ahead and let you break this down. But I really like Kalen Ballage this week. He's going to be in my write-up with my article that's coming out right after this. But I talked about how, despite how some would say that Ballage has been somewhat inefficient this season, he got 22 touches last week, okay, against the Colts. Wasn't effective. However, though, Bills are very weak against the run. They've allowed the 5th most rushing touchdowns in the league. And in every game this season, they've given up 13.8 fantasy points to at least one running back outside of just one game this year. And over the last 4 weeks, I think they've given up 133 or 130 yards per game on the ground, ranks dead last. Okay. So if he gets the volume and he's 4,300 and there's no ownership to be found, am I crazy to think that Ballage is somewhat of a decent play at home against the Bills?
Yeah, I'll say yes. I'll say yes, just because I'm not going to have much of him. So yeah, I think a lot of his touches last week came from just getting up 10-0 early, and yeah, definitely inefficient on them. So I think your upside this week in him more so than not is probably like 14, 15 touches. With yeah, the Bills on their interior run defense have been poor over the last month and a half. So there's upside there. I just can't trust the guy. $4,300 is a fine price point, somewhat of a pivot off of Brian Hill, but I don't know if it's an upside pivot. I think you probably start to see a little bit more touches for Gaskin and Layard after they were finally active for the first game this season last week. So we'll see how it goes. I think that just the way that the game script went as good as it can go for Ballage last week, and still was just not able to do much with it. He's going to be very touchdown dependent, of course. So that's where the upside comes from. I'm personally not going to have much. I know the angle of all the volume, so I guess it's sort of like Leonard Fournette volume and efficiency, but I just think that the lack of a passing game role for an underdog here in Ballage is just really tough for me to swallow. I don't think I'll end up having much of any of it.
All right. And once again, I keep asking myself, is this a play that I can go with? Because, I mean, when you look at these two price points between him and Hill, 4,300, 4,800, kind of similar hesitations with both guys. So it's just something to consider, given that there's a lot of things that kind of work in favor of Ballage, just like a lot of things work in favor of Hill. So, but if you're multi-entering, if I'm doing 150, millionaire lineups tomorrow, which I will be, I think I will have about 5, 7, 8 shares of Ballage. And I'm going to be under the field in Hill as well. But I'm just saying that, I don't think it's crazy if you dabble a little bit. But anything else in this game outside of this Ballage talk? Any love for John Brown in this passing game for the Bills going up against a pretty weak secondary, even though who's the backup to Xavier Howard? Because he's played fairly well. He's played fairly well these last couple games.
Yeah, he really has. And that's what makes me not like Brown as much. It's Nick Needham. He's played over the last like 3 or 4 weeks. He's been one of the better cornerbacks in the entire league over the last month of the season. So John Brown's been consistent as it gets. Only one of 2 wide receivers in the league with 50, which is actually crazy, but 50 receiving yards in every game. It's him and Michael Thomas. So you'll get very much consistency out of him. The price point's coming up though, and a very sneaky, difficult matchup for him. Although it's not like you have to kind of weight that much. He's 5% owned. So the matchup, I think some people just don't care about. So John Brown at low ownership, been consistent, tougher matchup than expected. I think is okay. Evan Singletary's price point is up. I think he'll slowly start to break away from Frank Gore. He's only out-touched him by 6 rush attempts over the last 3 weeks, even though he's out-snapped him 2 to 3 or 2/3 of the snaps to 1/3 for Gore. I think Singletary is somehow at low ownership. I think that's a decent play to get somewhere around 10% of and feel good about it against Miami, maybe even more. So Singletary is really the only thing from this game that I want. Maybe sprinkles of John Brown. Devontae Parker on the opposite side is just going to get Jermaine Johnson, who Tre'Davious White, and Trey White has just been absolutely dominating every wide receiver he's faced. He shut down Odell last week, 2 catches, 27 yards on 10 targets.
Man, the chat erupted with this Balaj talk. I mean, absolutely just went crazy. I don't know if you're looking at it, but man, you want to talk about everyone being against this Balaj talk. Hey, man, when it comes to final thoughts throughout the week, Balaj started creeping into my final thoughts. So I gotta go ahead and break it down and see if this is something where is an area where you can attack. But next game is definitely an area that everyone seems to be attacking because they are across the ownership board with no doubt. Falcons at Panthers. Talked about the Panthers being a 6-point favorite right now. We spoke a lot about this game already, but let's go ahead and finish this breakdown of any areas that maybe we didn't discuss, like Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, this passing game for the Falcons, and Curtis Samuel, maybe a pivot from DJ Moore or even Greg Olsen, who definitely has had some great productive games this season.
Yeah, so on the Carolina side, they're going to be one of the more popular teams this week, and for good reason, the matchup. And for the most part, outside of McCaffrey, the passing game is completely it's underpriced and very cheap. We talked about DJ Moore in depth at the top of the show. Seems like a fine play, very productive and consistent player with upside and a solid floor. So you can feel safe about him in cash and have upside in the GPP. So you like that. I think Curtis Samuel is fine. He'll have a nice matchup in this one as well against Wilson on the opposite side, who's been backing up Desmond Trufant. So he's been bad in just 2 games of work so far this season. Small sample, but Samuel should be able to pick that apart. If you want to go to this team here as a stack, I understand the ability to get there. It's so easy. They're cheap. It's a really good matchup. But I think my only concerns are once ownership starts getting high on a guy like Kyle Allen, who is consistently getting better this season, somebody who I really thought was terrible to start the year, but now has been that drive last week in the snow against the Packers to get to the 2-yard line. He's looked very good and comfortable, or very good compared to the beginning of the year. But how much do I want of it once he starts getting popular as a stack? And generally speaking, outside of like the DFS bubble, stacks and ownerships will be lower. So I think I'm fine getting to Carolina. I just do worry a little bit if Kyle Allen starts to get really popular and the stack does. Do you really want to be putting your money behind a really unproven, outside of like 2 games this year, Kyle Allen? Like, what is his real upside here? Is it 250 yards and 2 touchdowns? I don't really know if I trust him to go for 303 to win a tournament. So I more so get to one-offs of the DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey. Although I do think the stack is viable, I'm just a little bit skeptical of it.
He did throw his first 300-yard game of the season last week against the Packers. One thing to at least note. But I mean, outside of that, he's more of a game manager. When you look at his style of play, I guess we can say that maybe we can compare him to Garoppolo when it comes to fantasy purposes. Garoppolo, pretty good game manager, someone who, knows how to move the offense, yet just really not optimal when it comes to kind of fantasy purposes. I think you can kind of throw Kyle Allen in that mix right now, but he does have a great matchup, a very weak secondary. And it's really hard to kind of overlook that price point on DraftKings at 5,300. But I think a majority of the production will probably come from McCaffrey.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like your running back is just averaging 32 fantasy points a game. It's so hard. And a lot of that is in correlation in the passing game, or not a lot, but some of it with Kyle Allen. But when McCaffrey's just leading the league, or at least I think last week Aaron Jones might have passed him, but just right there in terms of double-digit rushing touchdowns, tons of yards on the ground. It's really hard to produce as a quarterback consistently at a top level. So, yeah, if there's going to be a lot of ownership behind it, I'll probably have like my 4th highest stack in Carolina, maybe 3rd. But if it's going to be really popular, I think that I feel more confident not betting in or betting on Kyle Allen if the field is going to, at least in stacks, and going somewhere else. On the other side of this, we talked about Brian Hill in depth. I think another value that is maybe going a little bit unnoticed is Russell Gage. I'd rather play Russell Gage straight up than Brian Hill. Obviously a different position, but
Wow.
yeah.
Damn.
If,
Okay.
if you're playing cash, or if you're playing even in a tournament, now the upside for Gage in a tournament is very touchdown dependent, but I think so is Brian Hill. So in cash, definitely I'd rather play Gage over Brian Hill. You're going to get Gage this week. No Hooper, obviously still no Sanu. He's ran 68 routes over the last 2 games. So I think I feel pretty confident with this guy running 30 plus routes out of the slot where there's no Devonta Freeman, no Austin Hooper. Anything in the short and intermediate range is going to probably go to Russell Gage, who's seen production in 2 games. Now, just like Mohamed Sanu, he's going to be touchdown dependent to win you a tournament, but he's also not priced like Sanu used to be for Atlanta in the 4 or 5K range. He's priced at 3,300. So he allows you to reach more, unlock more of the top level guys. And I think you could trust him for somewhere around a 4 or 5 catch performance for the 40-yard range, if not more. And if he falls in the end zone, he's a really good play in any format. So if we're banking on touchdowns, I'd rather take the lower owned, lower price guy and Gage over Brian Hill.
No, I mean, I'm not against this call. What took away from Gage last week, they went to him right away. In the first quarter, I think he already had 3 targets, 2 catches, and then he ended up having like 4 catches like the first 2 quarters, I think. What changed though was once they were up, they really abandoned the pass. They just ran, and it really took away and diminished anything of that passing game. The thought last week was we thought Gage would be playing from behind with Atlanta, but that was the complete opposite. And so that completely hurt the game flow and the script of the passing game, because prior to that, I mean, he had 9 targets the previous game as well against the Seahawks where they were down. So if we're talking about how we think Carolina can kind of route them and get out to an early game lead, I love Gage in the slot. I think we'll see a lot of targets go his way. And I think he'll have a lot more opportunities this week than compared to last week in New Orleans.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing about all of this. Like last week, if the game doesn't go, and even if Freeman gets hurt, but the game doesn't go just totally off the rails, nobody sees 6 sacks for Atlanta, almost tying the season high for them in one game and leading the whole game. If you get instead Brian Hill just having 12 carries for what would have been even really bad production somewhere in like the 30-yard range, nobody cares about him this week relative to the Carlos Hydes that's around him. And honestly, Gage probably ends up catching 6 balls in that game and is a little bit more popular. So if everybody wants to like focus on a 1-week sample of a 20 carry game, where I don't think Atlanta is going to be winning by 2 or 3 scores most of this one, or at least it doesn't seem likely, then I'll happily just go elsewhere. Now, I'm not going to just automatically stuff in Russell Gage into all my lineups, but where his ownership is relative to where a guy like Hills is in terms of cash or even GPPs, if you're talking about flex positionality for a cheaper play, I just like the value in Russell Gage way more.
All right, next game to close out these 1 o'clock games. We got the Saints at Bucks. Buccaneers 5.5-point dogs at home. Saints, man, very huge disappointment last week for so many people across the DFS industry. No touchdown passes for Breeze. Mike Thomas obviously got there. There was no doubt about that. Guy's just an absolute monster. And he gets a dream matchup this week. If last week wasn't a dream matchup already, he's getting another one against a very weak Buccaneers secondary, who's very good against the run, but they can't defend the pass. And we saw that last week with Christian Kirk going off. So Mike Thomas, we spoke about. Where else are you going at in this game?
Yeah, so from the Saints side, it's really interesting because you have to prioritize your lineups if you're going to be playing Saints stacks. And I will. I'll play some Saints stacks, maybe in like, if I get like 8% of Breeze, it'll just correlate to like 8% stacks of this team. But it's really difficult to get Michael Thomas in other one-off spots because it really dictates the rest of your lineup. And then at that point, you should just have Drew Brees to get as much correlation out of a big Michael Thomas game as you can. So like, I'm not going to have a lot of Michael Thomas. I'll probably have half the field, somewhere around 8, maybe 10% at most, just because you have to get more stacks, or at least that's what I'm finding. If you have Michael Thomas, you have to have Drew Brees, and I don't want too much of Drew Brees in these stacks because it makes it really tough to build out the rest of your team. So Brees and Michael Thomas make sense. Really hard to fit Kamara in there as well in a stack and feel good about it in a lot of your lineups. So getting to like Jared Cook and Traymon or Traquan Smith in some of these lineups, it's a spot where I don't feel comfortable doing that all that much. So I'll get to Michael Thomas in stacks, and that's as much as I'll have a Breeze, maybe like 8 to 10% of him, and not much else stands out. I do prefer Traquan Smith over Ted Ginn this week. He played on more snaps and ran more routes in his first week back last week in this offense. Jared Cook seems like another okay stacking spot, although Cook's priced up, but he saw 10 targets last week in a game where they trailed, which is important to note by a lot. You might not get that this week. So I think I like Traquan as a stacking option with Michael Thomas if you get there as sort of salary relief.
A guy that I think is a lock this week, and I'll be speaking on him more about this later, but Chris Godwin. I think he's in a great situation this week going up against a team that usually on the outsides, they play man, and then you have the over the middle where they kind of play a zone. It's like a cover 2 man type of approach. But the health of Marshawn Lattimore is also something that I need to break down, because if he also plays, he'll be on Mike Evans. And even though Marshawn Lattimore hasn't had the best of seasons,
I think he was ruled out.
Is he ruled out?
Yeah, I think he was recently ruled out.
Okay. So, I mean, it makes this secondary even softer now to an extent. And I say this because we talk about Mike Evans and playing man, and that's where he shines. And then Godwin, when he's over the middle in the slot and there's zone coverage with the linebackers, seems to excel. Well, Godwin already had this game against the Saints last time, scored 2 touchdowns, 100+ yard game. This week, however, ownership's not on him, and I kind of like that. I feel like this is a very strong leverage play. Tampa Bay is going to throw the ball. Winston has thrown for 300 yards in 4 straight games. Yes, he's a turnover beast, and that's okay. I'm not worried about that. But they're going to have to throw, and they're a 5.5 point dog at home. So I mean, there's going to have to be targets there for these wide receivers, and I don't mind either one. But I think Godwin has the upper hand this week. He got 12 targets last week. He still continues to just produce. Hasn't found the end zone for a few weeks, but I'm okay with that because I like where ownership's at. So do you have any love for these wideouts or this passing game of the Bucks?
Yeah, I think it's my favorite spot to stack on the slate. So I like Jameis Winston here. A home underdog is always a great spot to target. And now you have it should not be also downplayed. Nowhere near should be that Marshawn Lattimore is going to miss this game, who has been he had a bad week 1 against DeAndre Hopkins, but even that was overblown. Hopkins, for most part, was picking on some of the other outside cornerbacks like Eli Apple. So some of the production was given up by Lattimore, but he's been the only guy to shut down Amari Cooper this year. Held him to
Mm-hmm.
like 5 catches for 50 yards. He goose egged Mike Evans earlier this season. So he's been Mike Evans' kryptonite. Him being gone is going to free up Mike Evans. It's going to
Yep.
make Eli Apple the best cornerback on the Saints, which is just going to be a great matchup for Evans. Godwin when he's not in the slot. So yeah, I like both of those spots. I agree. Godwin's the guy that I prefer, even with no Lattimore. But that being said, they're both too low owned, 11% right now for Mike Evans' ownership, single digits for Godwin. Look, we can continue to think that they both can't go off in the same week because it hasn't happened in like 8 or 9 games, but it can definitely happen. And I'll be playing those lineups. But then also OJ Howard, I think, is another guy I'll have in groups. Ran the most routes of the season last week at 41 and played 99% of the snaps. So he finally was running routes and playing the snaps in his first week back. So he'll be a guy in groups. It'll pretty much just be Evans, Godwin, and OJ Howard groups for me to try and get some more salary relief by playing Howard. But that's my favorite spot to stack. And yeah, the team total doesn't look great, but at 22 for a team total, you can still have a tournament winning score, especially if Winston's going to throw like 40 times in this game with no Lattimore for the Saints.
Man, no, I love that call. I'm on board with you with that. With no matter what, they both can easily go off in this game. And if we predict that the Saints that really kind of revive themselves offensively and that they get out and Bucks are just going to have to throw and play from behind. I love that. And I mean, we know Winston's going to throw the ball, so there's no doubt about the identity of this offense. So yeah, I love the call of stacking the Bucks. I love that all day. I mean, even stacking the Bucks and maybe playing it back with Thomas, but then that's going to probably put you in a position of having to play Brian Hill or these lower price running backs because you're not going to be able to really fit those high price running backs like we spoke about earlier.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue is trying to run back this game. Similar to Dallas is finding like viable run back options for that game with Detroit. But for this one, yeah, Michael Thomas is so expensive. It's really hard to even if you play OJ Howard, get to like a Chris Godwin and Michael Thomas and feel good about the rest of your lineup. There's some 6K running backs that are good plays. Maybe Miles Sanders opens up, and we'll talk about him in a second. Either way, so I think it's viable in some spots. But then yeah, you're just picking on if you want to run it back with guys like Jared Cook, Traquan Smith, who I don't feel the greatest about, but they're definitely going to be in a grouping on Fantasy Cruncher when I go through it as run back options. I imagine I get sprinkles of all of them. And then I'll also have spots where I just have the team stack of Tampa Bay with no game stack on it.
All right, as we go into this 4 o'clock games, we got 3 of them. Don't forget, awesemo.com/NFL, promo code NFL strategy. Get 50% off your first month. And for everyone's in here right now, we appreciate you guys once again waking up early, supporting us. If you can, give us a thumbs up. Get that momentum going. There's a lot of you in here right now, and we just appreciate and acknowledge every single one of you taking the time to go ahead and hearing us and giving you guys this free content. All right, 4 o'clock games. First one up, Arizona at San Fran. San Fran, 11.5 point favorites. I'm going to tell you one thing, and I might be a little crazy. I think Arizona wins this game.
Uh-oh.
All right, I guess I'll go into it a little bit more. I think there's a lot of injuries offensively right now for the 49ers. And Arizona has, up until this point, been the toughest for the defense offensively in regards to kind of how they operated in that game. When you look at it from all these different teams, Arizona gave them the most trouble, even more than the Seattle offense, in my opinion. And now we're in a situation where you have Kittle and Sanders, who are probably going to be out of this game, and Breed is out. There's not many offensive weapons now that Garoppolo did have now in this game. And so I think based on how I feel with Arizona, Arizona's played good, and they have somewhat of a decent offense. But Kenyon Drake, I love, and I don't think David Johnson comes back this week. I don't know if you saw his carry against the Bucs. Did you see it?
Yeah, when he's like walking, jogging.
Dude, it was embarrassing. Sal, you could have at least got 3 yards in that carry. 100%. So I love Kenyon Drake this week in regards to kind of this matchup and how this offense is. I mean, they're going to move fast paced, but I don't think offensively San Fran will be able to keep up with Arizona. And I might be crazy, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I'm on the other side of it where I think the defense alone for San Fran can just win this game or just really keep down the Arizona side of the offense. Like fantasy wise, on the Arizona side, there's really not much that stands out. What's worth noting is that Christian Kirk played on the outside last week a lot. That's where he saw 2 of his 3 touchdowns, which was good. But if he even plays there anywhere near as much as last week, he's probably going to get stonewalled against Richard Sherman, who has the lowest passer rating against in the league at 40.6. Mostly on the other side, filling in for Witherspoon still, 79 pass rating against, only allowing 15 receptions for 200 yards all year. So Kirk just becomes sort of a guy that I don't want to roster. I don't really want to get to Kwan Williams' defense in the slot against Larry Fitzgerald, who's been inconsistent. And then really the rest of the offense is tough. It's a messy backfield. Chase Edmonds is going to miss again, but I don't trust David Johnson. I would trust Kenyon Drake, if anything, here if I had to pick one, but I'm just going to avoid the backfield on the 11-game slate. So Arizona is sort of a wash for me in this spot. And then Tevin Coleman becomes one of the better running back plays on the other side as a huge home favorite here with no Matt Breida. I think you could project him to see as a minimum 60% of the snaps with the upside to play 70 to 80. I think if he ends up being chalk, it's good chalk, but right now he's below average ownership. I do like Tevin Coleman a lot this week. And I think the fact that Breida is going to miss, he's doubtful. I think it makes Raheem Mostert, at least at 3,400, worth a mention for GPP Millie Maker Flyers. More times than not, if they are winning by, like this spread indicates, 12.5, if they're up in this game, it's a spot where Mostert probably sees 10 to 12 touches. And at 3,400, which you're hoping for is a big play and a touchdown there, but you can not really find anywhere else in the running back range below 4K that has that same upside. So it's really just Tevin Coleman, Mostert. Keep an eye on Emmanuel Sanders. He says he's going to try and play, game time decision. And then you have Dante Pettis, who's questionable. So the Deebo Samuel's price point is okay. I don't think you're going to see nearly as much volume, though, as a 12.5-point favorite. So I probably don't get there as much.
Man, so you didn't mention my Arizona defense.
Yeah.
1,500 on DraftKings.
Yeah.
They blitz the 3rd most in the league. They have the 7th most sacks. If they're not having all these weapons, you don't think it's possible that they disrupt Garoppolo and really cause some issues and become problematic for this offense given these weapons are out?
Yeah, so I think there's a possibility that happens. The only issue here is it's similar to I played earlier in the year a $1,500 defense at like a heavy clip, and they were facing like Baltimore or something, and they only ended up getting like 2 or 3 fantasy points. They didn't get blown away. It's just that when a team's going to run so much, it's so hard to have defensive points because you can't get sacks. And you just can't really, you're going to rely on fumble returns or punt returns for touchdowns. And it's really tough to get that compared to getting pressure and causing fumbles and sacks in the backfield and then returning it. So yeah, I just don't think they're going to be passing enough. They passed 46 times in the previous week where they needed to against Seattle in an extended game. Whereas this week, I think Jimmy G is more likely to throw like 26, 28 times. And on that account, there's just a lot less upside there for a defense. That said, $1,500, if they get you 6 points, they smash for you. So you don't really need too much to happen. So yeah, I'm on board to getting some of the $1,500 defense. I probably just won't have a ton of it. I made that mistake a couple weeks back, and maybe I shouldn't be biased by that, but it really hurt.
Yeah, I mean, you lock them in, that leaves you with 6,062 left per player. I mean, which is a pretty healthy amount given of these top running backs that we want to roster. And I mean, even if you're looking to play Mike Thomas or stack these Bucks, the Cardinals, I mean, it's a launch shot. I mean, I guess you could say, but with the injuries and with how they kind of roll out blitz packages, I mean, I feel a little bit more confident rather than if, San Francisco was fully healthy. Next game, New England, Philly. You mentioned Miles Sanders. Take it away.
Yeah, so Miles Sanders. So right now, what you're seeing is Jordan Howard is questionable, but not yet cleared for contact, and we're sitting here on Saturday, so it seems like he might not even play in this one. Miles Sanders at $4,100. I have interest even if Howard does play. Look, you have no Alshon Jeffrey, no Deshaun Jackson, as they haven't had for a while now. And those are just your two outside receivers. Matt Collins hasn't had any separation, hasn't caught a ball, and is getting played off the field. The Eagles are literally changing their offense to last year. They ran a lot of two tight end sets, 12 personnel, but they're doing that forcefully now because they have no outside receivers and Matt Collins can't get separation. So they have more Dallas Goedert on the field. And in a spot where there's no Jeffrey, it makes so much sense, all the sense in the world for Bill Belichick, the guy everybody says takes away your best player, to just double team Zach Ertz and cause him problems, which really in the passing game only leaves Nelson Aguilar, Dallas Goedert to an extent on limited routes run, and Miles Sanders out of the backfield. So if you get no Jordan Howard, I would feel really confident giving Miles Sanders 15 to 16 touches at 4,100 and maybe five targets or 5.5 targets. Even if you do have him there, he's still a nice tournament play. So keep an eye on Jordan Howard. I don't think he's going to end up playing. And if he doesn't, Miles Sanders becomes just the number one pivot off of Brian Hill, and a guy who I think has similar, if not more, upside in a game where everybody's saying, oh, but they're playing the Patriots, they're going to get blown out. They're only 3-point underdogs.
Right.
So Miles Sanders for me right now, if there's no Howard, probably becomes the priority pay down spot. If there is Howard, just have a lot less interest, but I'll have middling ownership of him in some of the tournaments.
Let's talk about Sony Michel. He's 4,900 on DK. Eagles defense, though, when it comes to the rushing, is very stout. They've caused a lot of running backs this year some issues. And so, however, though, do you have any love for Sony Michel? Even though he's a workhorse, but he's so cheap, could we go there? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to get there this week just because of, like, if there was no Brian Hill this week and really no Miles Sanders or JD McKissick, then maybe it's worth getting up to Michelle. But just the matchup is so difficult here. And there was a span where he was running more routes, but then Rex Burkhead came back and just crushed any of the passing game volume he was seeing. So it's just a guy who I don't really trust to have anything probably in this type of a matchup more than a success of like 8 fantasy points if he doesn't find the end zone. So I'm probably going to stay away from it. There'll be no ownership if you want to get there. I'd rather get to James White, although I think I really compare James White to just a slot wide receiver. Like, he's going to see 6-7 targets. He's averaging 6.9 targets a game. So you have him as a slot wide receiver. He gets no carries on this team anymore. It's just not worth paying the price tag, in my opinion, for James White if he's going to just be a guy who has below average air yards and ADOT because he's coming out of the backfield. So for New England, what stands out is just really Edelman and Mohamed Sanu against an improving but still not great Eagles secondary.
Last game. And for anyone in chat, Slack, YouTube, go ahead, ask your questions so that way we can go ahead and address them as we come to the close of this show. Bengals, Raiders, not much to say for me. I'm just going to say Josh Jacobs, lock button. And if you want to run back Tyler Boyd, because I think the Raiders are going to rout this team, that's pretty much it.
Yep. Yeah. Josh Jacobs in a great spot. We talked about him at the top of the show. The ownership at 30%. The only thing to poke holes in is if he doesn't get in the end zone, he can disappoint. But I think it's as good of a spot as ever to get into the end zone against this team. Huge favorite here. So I like Josh Jacobs. Other than that, on Oakland, Derek Carr, if this game was going to stay relatively competitive, and it's not projected that way, would be just a great stacking option. But at the same point, he's been really good in real life. But more times than not, he gets you like 16 or 18 fantasy points in DK. So I don't really think Derek Carr is going to win anybody tournaments. So although it's a good matchup, I just really stick to Jacobs. I think Darren Waller's the best tight end play on the slate. He's too cheap on a slate where you don't have George Kittle because he's injured at 7K. You have an overpriced Mark Andrews, who I probably don't get too much unless Tayshaun Gibson's out. I'll get to a little bit more. But then you have a really nicely priced Darren Waller, who, even if this game's a blowout, you're probably going to have Derek Carr throwing like 28 times. And more times than not, Waller still sees about 6 or 7 targets in that type of a game. So Waller's a priority from this game for me at tight end. Jacobs at running back. Tyrell Williams, I like in his matchup. Drake or Patrick was just placed on IR. They're really banged up. They have BW Webb, a slot cornerback, playing the outside now. We'll probably see Tyrell Williams, but the only downside for Williams is, like, he's not a guy who gets volume. He's averaging around 5 targets per game this season. So you need the big play upside. And if he's going to come in with some ownership like he is, I believe, so far this week, and really just any ownership coattailing him, it's not a play that I feel like I have to get to. He's coming in right now around 19% for a guy who is very much so big play, boomer bust upside. I think I'll stay away from that. And yeah, I echo what you said about Tyler Boyd. Ryan Finley really only throws about 6 yards downfield, 5.6 yards per attempt last week, 6 yards all the preseason. It's just Tyler Boyd. I'll mention for the people that have mentioned Joe Mixon, he had 30 carries last week where they were trailing, but his quarterback Finley threw a pick 6 and had a fumble 6 for a touchdown. So it was more so just give Mixon the ball. Let's not let this kid throw the ball anymore. Yeah. And then in the fourth quarter, Mixon had, I think, 11 carries. So it was just so much skewed to Finley had a fumble 6 in the fourth quarter. It was just getting out of hand. They were down 36. I don't think you're going to see Mixon just getting 25 carries when they're trailing a lot moving forward. But plus was that Joe Mixon ran twice as many routes as Gio Bernard, who left a little bit in that game with an injury.
Mixon's interesting. I saw it in chat. People spoke of him. I think it's somewhat to consider if you're multi-entering. 5,500, 30 carries last week, 17 the week prior. And just a little narrative. Last week against the Raiders, 129 yards, 2 touchdowns, scored 30 DK points. So, I'm not one for, any type of narratives like that. But who knows? I mean, if he's getting that production, you never know. In these types of situations, it's always interesting to go that route. That's it, guys. Week 11, final thoughts. The NFL DFS strategy show, awesemo.com, presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. We appreciate every single one of you guys. Sal, before we head out, where can we go ahead and find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SalVetriDFS. I'll be here on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. talking about NFL on the Awesemo channel. Wednesdays with Josh Engelman at 9:30 a.m. talking NBA strategy. And then I have a YouTube channel as well with some more fantasy content. Just my name, Sal Vetri, if you want to check it out.
All right. And for me, guys, find me at Chris Randone on all platforms. Other than that, you guys, good luck. Make great decisions. Play great players. Don't overthink it. We wish you the best of luck. Have a great week.